in the final portion of the book of Leviticus, the portion of Bechukotai. The Torah tells us in Bechukotai Telechu, God tells the Jewish people, if you will follow my statutes and you will do my laws, then I will give you rain in its time. I will give you all the blessings that you need, and your land will be secure, and you will dwell upon your land forever. And then the Torah goes on to say that if, God forbid, you don't follow the commandments of the Torah, then the Torah begins to enumerate 49 different curses that will befall the Jewish people. Finally, at the end of these curses, the Torah tells us at the end of days that God will remember the Jewish people, and then He will take us out of exile. And so in chapter 26, verse number 42, the Pasuk says, "V'zacharti es brisi Yaakov." I will remember the covenant that I have with Jacob. V'af es brisi Yitzchak, and also the covenant that I had with his father, that was Isaac. V'af es brisi Avraham, and also the covenant that I had with the father of Isaac, which is Avraham. And then it goes on, V'ha'eretz Ezkar, and I'll also remember the land. So the Torah tells us that I'll remember the forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. However, it says it in the reverse order. First I will remember Jacob, then I will remember Isaac, and then I will remember Abraham. So the first question is, why does the Torah reverse the order of our fathers, of the patriarchs? Secondly, if you look at the word Yaakov, Yaakov over here is spelled with the letter Vav. Normally Yaakov has 4 letters, Yud, Ayin, Kuf, and a Vez. And here it has a 5th letter, and that is the letter Vav. Why does Yaakov have the extra Vav? And finally, being that Bechukotai is the last portion of the Torah, it is also called Shabbos Chazak. In other words, after we read the entire portion and we get to the final verse of the portion, the entire congregation stands up and the Balkorah, the reader, reads the last verse, and when he gets to the final word of the Parsha, which is also the final word of the entire book of Leviticus, the entire congregation in unison calls out, Chazak, Chazak, v'niz chazik, which means strengthen yourself, and be strengthened. And therefore, the portion of Bechukotai needs to give us strength, is a portion of inspiration. What is the inspiration that the portion of Bechukotai is telling us after all of these 49 curses? It's interesting to note that the Rabbi explains that the 2 different ways of looking at the fathers depends on what we are focusing on. Is it the greatness, or is it being the first? When we talk about being first, Avraham Avinu, Abraham was the first. He was the trailblazer. In his generation, there was no other that believed in one God. And he was the one that proved this by having debates and talking to people and inspiring people. And he was so sure that there was one God that when he was faced before King Nimrod, who was the evil tyrant of that time, and Nimrod said to Avram, "Bow down to me," Avram said, "No, I will only bow down to the God who is the creator of the universe." So Nimrod said, "If that's the case, we'll throw you into a fiery inferno." And they threw Avraham Avinu, or Kazdim, into this fiery inferno. And Avraham Avinu walked out alive, and because of that, many people followed in Avraham Avinu's path. And this was the path of Avraham Avinu throughout his entire life, wherever he went, down to Pharaoh in Egypt, or to Plishtim with the king of Avimelech. He constantly taught and proved this concept of monotheism, this belief in a one God. So Avraham Avinu, he was the trailblazer. He was the one that started this entire movement of believing in God. So when people say, why did God choose the Jewish people? One of the responses is that in truth, we chose God. Avraham chose God. So in return, God chose us. After Avraham was Yitzchak. Yitzchak also had self-sacrifice for God. When God told Avraham, take your only son, the one you love, Yitzchak, and put him on the altar, Yitzchak did not refuse. He was willing to be slaughtered by his father Abraham. Now this was also a great feat of self-sacrifice, but not as great as his father Abraham, for many reasons. Number one is fire is a worse death than death by the sword. Number two is Avraham Avinu had no father to teach him. He had to do it on his own. Yitzchak was doing this because he was raised in the home of Avraham. Avraham Avinu said, keep Shabbos and keep kosher and study Torah. His entire life was Torah, was God. All he heard from his father Avraham was about God. So now Avraham tells him, God came to me and said that he wants me to take you for an offering on the altar. Yitzchak considered this to be a great privilege. And therefore he went together with Avraham Avinu without any struggle. But Yitzchak was put to the sword. He was willing to die for God. And then came Yaakov. What was Yaakov Avinu's test? Yaakov Avinu suffered for 20 years in the house of Lavan. And yet he did not give up his Torah. As we find when he met his brother Esav, what did he say? Im Lavan garti, v'tayag mitzvah shamarti. Even though I was in the house of Lavan, the swindler, I never forgot my Torah, and I continued to protect the 613 commandments of the Torah even before the Torah was given. So when it came to self-sacrifice, when it came to die for God, Avraham Avinu was the greatest. He was the first, and he was willing to be thrown into a firing inferno. And therefore, many times throughout the Torah, and in our daily prayers, we say, God, remember Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. However, when it comes to Torah scholarship, and when it comes to the performance of deeds, and to do a mitzvah perfectly, and to do a mitzvah in a meticulous, scrupulous way, here we find that Yaakov was the greatest. Yaakov is called the Bechir Shaba'avis. He's called the chosen of all the forefathers. Number one, all his 12 children went in the ways of God. They were Jewish. In contrast to Avraham, who had a child like Ishmael, who became the father of all the Arabs. And Yitzchak, who had a child, a wicked child like Esav, who became the father of Rome. In contrast to Avraham and Yitzchak, Yaakov, all his 12 children were Jews and followed in the ways of Torah. So Yaakov, in this aspect, was greater. And yet when the Torah speaks about the greatness of Yaakov, what does the Torah say? Yaakov ish tam yoshev hayolim. He was a man that sat all day in the tent studying Torah. That was the greatness of Jacob. He was a great Torah scholar, and his scholarship was even greater than the scholarship of Avraham and Yitzchak, because it was based on their knowledge. For 15 years, Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov were all studying Torah together. So Yaakov received the knowledge from his grandfather Avraham and from his teacher, his father Yitzchak, and then he continued to grow, standing on the shoulders of giants, and he progressed in his knowledge of Torah. And the same is true with the performance of the mitzvos. Learning from Avraham and learning from Yitzchak, Yaakov was able to perfect and beautify the commandments as well. So therefore, when God says, I will take the Jews out of Egypt, what does he say? V'zacharti es brisi Yaakov. I will remember Jacob first. And this is to hint to us that in order for the Jews to leave Egypt and to leave exile and to leave this present galus, this present exile. We don't need to suffer death by fire. We don't need to suffer death by the hand of the sword. We don't have to have martyrdom or crusades or the Spanish Inquisition that put the Jews to death because they kept their faith and their religion. But on the contrary, the Torah says that Yaakov, the true path and the easy path to leave this exile will be the path of Jacob. And that is the path of Torah study. And it's interesting to note that the Rebbe said that the quickest and easiest way to bring about the coming of Mashiach is through the study of Torah. For Torah is the book of peace that brings peace to the whole world. And particularly to study the teachings of the Talmud and the Zohar and the Kabbalah and the teachings of our sages throughout all the generations pertaining to the concepts and the laws of Mashiach. Because when you learn about these ideas of Mashiach and redemption, this creates a yearning within our souls and a yearning within our hearts for this reality. And Torah has the ability to create reality. If Torah says this is the way it is, it changes the nature, and that is the way it is. So, by learning Torah, and particularly to study the Torah dealing with redemption, this will bring about, God willing, very soon the ultimate redemption. So therefore, the Torah says, "V'zacharti es brisi Yaakov." I will remember the covenant of Jacob, which is the covenant of the study of Torah. Why, however, does Yaakov have a vav? Where did the vav come from? And in truth, Rashi right here tells us that the vav comes from Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. Yaakov Avinu met Elijah the prophet and said, "When are you coming?" Because Elijah the prophet is the harbinger of the Mashiach. He will come and tell us that the Messiah is on the way. So Yaakov said to Elijah, "No, when are you coming?" He says, "Don't worry, we're going to come." He says, "No, I don't trust you. I'm going to take the letter Vav of your name of Eliyahu as collateral that you are going to come and take the Jews out of exile." So the question is, why did he take 5 times the letter Vav? Throughout the entire Tanakh, the 24 books of the Torah, we find that the name Eliyahu is spelled 5 times without a Vav, and the name Yaakov is spelled 5 times with the Vav, with the extra Vav. So why is it that Yaakov Avinu chose to take 5 times the letter Vav from Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet? So there's an interesting interpretation from the Maral of Prague. The Maral of Prague, who was the ancestor of the Alter Rebbe, says that there are 5 digits to the hand, 5 fingers, and they look like the letter Vav, which is a straight letter. In other words, by taking 5 times the letter Vav, Yaakov was making a handshake with Eliyahu Hanavi. He was making a deal. Eliyahu, promise me you're going to take the Jews out of exile. And by doing so, he took 5 Vavs from Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. Furthermore, says the Maral, that the gematria of Vav is how much? 6. Vav equals 6. He took 5 Vavs, which means 5 times 6. 5 times 6 equals 30. There are 30 bones in the hand. And here too, again, this emphasizes the fact that he did a handshake with Eliyahu Hanavi. So this is the interpretation of the Maharal. The Tzemach Tzedek gives another interpretation. The Tzemach Tzedek says we can understand this based on the verse in Isaiah 52, verse number 13. So there in chapter 52, verse 13, Isaiah says like this, pertaining to Mashiach. He says Mashiach has 5 great qualities. And that is, he says, behold my servant, number 1, shall prosper. Number 2, shall be exalted. Number 3, shall be lifted up. Number 4, shall be high. And number 5, very high. Ma'oid, very high. Which, by the way, the word ma'oid, which means very, are the same letters as Adam. Adam is an acronym for Aleph is Adam, Dalid is David, and Mem is Moshe. And that is when Mashiach will come, he will not only study Torah with those that are simple, but Mashiach will come and study Torah also with David HaMelech, with King David, and also with Moses. And that will be his great humility, that even though he will study Torah with the greatest sages and teach them the secrets of the inner level of the Torah, at the same time he will also have time to teach the simpletons the most deepest secrets of the Torah as well. And furthermore, the concept of 5 alludes to redemption. And all of us know this from the Pesach Seder. We have 4 cups of wine that we drink. And then we have the 5th cup of wine, which is the cup of Elijah the Prophet. And this cup we do not drink because we don't have the 5th cup yet. We didn't internalize it yet. Eliyahu Navi did not yet take us out of the Golus, of the exile. And furthermore, the 5th represents the 5th level of the soul. There are 5 levels to the soul: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechidah. The 5th level of the soul represents the Mashiach of the soul. Every Jew has within them the spark of Mashiach. And so Yaakov, by taking 5 vavs from Elijah the Prophet, was giving us the ability to access and actualize the 5th level of our soul, which is the level of Mashiach. So the question still remains, why is it that Yaakov, of all the forefathers, was the one that took the collateral from Elijah the prophet? It's true Yaakov represents Torah, but Avraham and Yitzchak also represent great qualities like kindness and prayer. Perhaps we can say that the reason Yaakov was the one that took this collateral from Eliyahu is because Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov our forefather, was the most familiar with exile. He himself suffered in exile 20 years. He was oppressed and persecuted by Lavan Arami, Lavan the swindler, who was his father-in-law. And then he went down to Egypt for another 17 years. And again he suffered in this very difficult place, which Egypt etymologically means borders and constraints. He had to leave his home in Israel, and he had to go down to Egypt, and there he had to live out the rest of his life. So being that Yaakov died in exile and knew the difficulties of exile, how exile is dangerous for a Jew physically and spiritually, Yaakov Avinu was the one that went to Eliyahu Navi and took the vav of Eliyahu for collateral. And this is the chazak v'nischazik. As we conclude the portion of Bechukotai, and as we conclude the 3rd book of the Torah, which alludes to Yaakov, who is the 3rd of the patriarchs, we are reminded that Yaakov Avinu, the 3rd and the chosen of all the fathers, went to Eliyahu Navi and took the letter Vav for collateral. And we have a promise that he will take us out of Golus and he will bring us to the Holy Land. And God in this week's portion clearly dictates and says, V'zacharti, I have remembered the covenant of Jacob and the covenant of Isaac and the covenant of Abraham. So when we read the portion, this has to give us additional inspiration to strengthen our emunah, to strengthen our faith, that today, mamish, literally, Mashiach can come and will come and take us out of this bitter, dark golus. And this is also connected with a story of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was the Balkora, was the reader in his shul. And he would read the Torah every Shabbos. Now, just like in Bechukotai, there are 49 curses, in the portion of Kitavai, there are actually 98 curses. So one Shabbos, the Alter Rebbe was not there, the Shabbos of Parshas Kitavai. And that week somebody else read the Torah. The Alter Rebbe's son, the Mittel Rebbe, after hearing the reading of the Torah, got very sick. He was not yet bar mitzvah. And when the other Chassidim asked him, why are you sick? He said, because I got sick from all of these curses that were read this Shabbos in the synagogue. So he said to him, what do you mean? Bechukotai, they read the curses, and last year they read the curses, yet you never got sick. How come also now you got sick from the curses? He says, very simple. When Father reads the Torah, I don't hear curses. And because the Alter Rebbe did not read the Torah that Shabbos, he heard the curses. Now, this is not simply a story of a child, but this has very deep insights into the purpose of these curses. As we find in Hasidic doctrine, that these 49 curses in Bechukotai, and later the 98 curses of Kisavai, is really blessings in disguise. It's such a great blessing that the only way we could describe it is through the negative. And therefore, sometimes when a holy tzaddik reads even the curses, we have the ability to derive from this the true blessing. And this also complements the following story. I heard the story from Shlomo Raskin, Rabbi Shlomo Raskin, a beautiful story. Rabbi Shlomo Raskin is the chief rabbi of Efrat in Israel. And for many years, he was the rabbi here in New York. And he says when he was a young boy, he used to daven very often in the synagogue of the Kloisenberger Rebbe. And the Kloisenberger Rebbe, unfortunately, went through the Holocaust. But Baruch Hashem, his life was spared. When it came to the reading of the curses in the synagogue, Rabbi Shlomo Raskin tells me the following the story. He remembers being a child in the shul. And the custom is when the Balkora, when the reader reads these curses, he lowers his voice so that we don't want to amplify the curses, we want to diminish the curses. If it has to happen, God forbid, it should happen, in a very subtle way. And all of a sudden, the Kloisenberger Rebbe screams out, Hecher! Louder! And everybody in the shul shushes. Wow. And the Balkora, the reader, also becomes quiet. And then again he continues to read on the curses in a low tone. And again the Kloisenberger Rebbe says, Hecher! Louder! And again everybody is silent. Everybody looks around. And again the Balkora continues to read it in a low voice. And finally the third time the Kloisenberger Rebbe screamed out, Hecher! Louder! Read the curses louder! Because we already suffered from these curses. We had a Holocaust. We had a Spanish Inquisition. We had all these terrible, terrible historic events throughout the bloody, dark Jewish history. And now the time has come that these curses are translated into blessings. So Hecher, read it louder. So we should hear the blessings in these words. No longer shall we hear the curses in these words. And this is the inspiration that we derive from the portion of Bechukotai. That all of these curses are transformed into blessings, blessings beyond our wildest dreams, blessings beyond our wildest comprehension. And these blessings, God willing, will be manifested in a world of peace, where no longer will there be hunger and starvation and suffering, but rather we will see peace, universal peace throughout the entire world. A world that no longer will there be death and sickness, but we will live forever, soul in the body. And this will take place very soon, God willing, with the coming of Mashiach. B'mheira b'meinu. Amen.